The wind came restless off the prairie, tugging at the loose boards of the barn and whistling through the bare branches like some lonely soul that had lost its way. Out here, miles from the nearest town, silence had a weight of its own, pressing down on the land, pressing down on the man who had chosen to live apart from others. He had worked this soil with hands roughened like leather, sunburnt face set against drought, storm, and the long ache of winters that had no end. For all his grit, for all his years, one truth had settled deep in his bones. The earth was easier company than people. Cows did not ask questions. Horses did not argue. A roof patched with his own hands did not judge him for being alone. But when the lamps burned low at night and the coyotes cried from the hills, the emptiness in that cabin was louder than any wind. Folks in the village downriver called him the lonely rancher. He never corrected them. Loneliness was not a shame, only a fact, like the cracked earth in July or the frozen wells in January. Still, a man could not wrestle silence forever. There were moments by the fire after the chores, when he stood looking at the single chair across the table, that the truth gnawed at him. He needed a wife, or at least the nearness of someone who might warm the place with laughter and footsteps softer than his boots. Yet time had slipped away. The women he might have courted had long chosen other lives, or other men. So when he heard whispers about the paper in town, an advertisement placed by women from back east, widows and workers, some with little ones, clinging to their skirts, he felt the stir of something he had nearly forgotten: hope. It seemed a wild notion at first, to send letters across states, to strangers, promising a life made of hard ground and long days. Yet wasn't that what his own father had done, when he carved a farm out of wilderness and convinced a girl from a city to follow him west? There was no shame in reaching for what a man could not find alone. He rode into town on a gray morning, hat pulled low, dust clinging to his coat. The post office smelled of old paper and coal smoke. On the wall, among notices for missing cattle and rewards for horse thieves, was the paper. He studied the words carefully. Some were young girls, with nothing but hope to offer. Some were widows seeking steady men. And then one line caught his eye: widow, with 2 children, willing to wed. Will consider frontier life if children are accepted as his own. He stood there for a long time, the words burning into him. Children. He had no kin, no nieces or nephews. He had thought only of a wife, never of little ones. Yet something in that message tugged harder than any other. A woman asking not for her own comfort alone, but for the safety of her children. A promise not of sweetness, but of burden and trust. The weeks after, letters passed between them. Hers were plain, without frill, but honest. She wrote of the husband she had lost in a mill accident, of 2 children who needed steady ground beneath their feet, of nights spent worrying over how long her savings might last. He wrote back of the land, the cabin, the life he could offer. He did not hide the harshness of it, the cold winters, the long rides to town, the work from dawn till night. Still, her replies came, steady as his. And then one letter arrived, shorter than the rest, where she said she would come, if he promised one thing clear: I will step into your cabin only if my children become yours too. Those words echoed in his mind long after he folded the letter. He pictured the little ones, faces unknown to him, walking across the yard where no child's footsteps had ever sounded. He imagined their voices filling the silence. Could he be father as well as husband? Could a man who had spent so many years alone shape himself into something gentler, something whole? The day she arrived, the station was crowded with wagons, trunks, and weary travelers. He stood awkwardly near the platform, boots heavy with mud, heart thudding harder than when he had broken wild colts. The train hissed to a stop, steam rising like ghostly breath into the air. People spilled out, clutching bags, calling names. And then he saw her plain dress, shawl wrapped close, 2 children at her side. The boy's hand gripped hers tight. The girl held a small bundle of cloth. Their eyes were wary, but not afraid, as if they had already walked through worse storms than any prairie could give them. She met his gaze for only a moment before turning to calm her boy. But that moment was enough. She was not a girl dreaming of romance. She was a woman carrying weight, standing firm because she must. The kind of strength that matched his own, though born of different battles. He stepped forward, clearing his throat, words catching. "Ma'am," he said, tipping his hat. She gave a small nod, her children watching him like hawks. The wagon ride back to the ranch was quiet, broken only by the wheels creaking and the children whispering. He tried once to point out the hills, the stream that ran clear after rain. The boy only looked at him, uncertain, then back at his mother. The girl leaned against her, clutching that bundle tighter. The woman said little, only that she was grateful for the ride. Her voice steady but guarded. By the time the cabin came into sight, dusk had settled across the land. The roofline stood sharp against the sky, smoke curling from the chimney had lit before leaving. The man felt a swell of nervousness he had never known, not even in storms or stampedes. This was no battle with land or beast. This was the moment that might change everything. The wagon stopped. The children stared at the cabin as if measuring its walls, its promise, its threat. The woman placed her hands on their shoulders. Then she turned to him, her eyes steady, her voice low but firm. "Remember what I wrote," she said. "I'll enter only if my children become yours too." The air hung still, the prairie quiet as if waiting. He opened his mouth, but no words came, only the weight of her gaze, the trust she was offering, and the choice before him, one that would mark the rest of his life. And in that silence, with the firelight flickering faintly from the cabin window, everything hung on what he would say next. The lantern inside the cabin threw a soft glow across the windows, but outside in the fading dusk the moment seemed stretched thin, like a taut rope that could snap with the wrong word. He held his breath, staring at her, then at the 2 children who clung to her skirts. The boy's eyes were sharp, too old for his years, as if he had learned already to guard what was left of his family. The girl's gaze was softer but wary, her small bundle pressed so tightly against her chest that her knuckles had gone white. Their mother's hand lingered on both their shoulders, firm and protective, ready to shield them if need be. He swallowed hard. His whole life, decisions had been simple: plant or plow, mend or rebuild, ride or walk. Work gave answers. But this was something work could not solve. He had thought loneliness was heavy, but now he felt the weight of a promise unspoken. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to give her what she asked, to take the children into his life without hesitation. Yet the words caught like dry husks in his throat. He had no notion of being a father. He had no practice in gentleness. Could a man hardened by years of silence and work truly raise another man's children as his own? The woman waited, eyes steady, not pleading, not coaxing, just waiting. The prairie wind shifted, rattling the wagon boards, and still he said nothing. Then the boy, impatient or maybe protective, spoke first. "If you don't want us," he said, voice tight but clear, "we can go back." The rancher's chest tightened at those words. Go back where? To nothing but hunger and rented rooms? To the crowded towns where widows begged and children were turned out as soon as they could carry coal? He looked at the boy again, and something inside him shifted, a tug deeper than fear. Perhaps he was not ready, but he knew he could not turn them away. He gave a slow nod, finally finding his voice. "Come in," he said quietly. "This is your home now. All of you." The woman's shoulders eased the slightest bit, but she said nothing more. She simply guided the children down from the wagon. Their boots crunched on the dry earth, small. Steps hesitant. Together they stood before the cabin, its door slightly ajar, the warmth of firelight spilling out into the night. Inside, the cabin was plain but tidy. A rough-hewn table stood in the middle, with 2 chairs he had built himself. A narrow bed pressed against one wall, a stove against another. He had cleaned it as best he could before leaving for town, sweeping the dust, setting out blankets he had bartered for last fall. Still, he knew it looked bare, more a shelter than a home. The children stepped inside slowly, eyes darting from wall to wall, searching for comfort and finding little. The girl's gaze landed on the mantel, where a single iron candlestick stood. She set down her bundle and reached up to touch it with her fingertips. The boy crossed his arms, silent, his jaw set. Their mother stood at the threshold, as though testing the air, then finally stepped across, her voice calm. "It's enough," she said. "Enough to begin." They ate supper in near silence, bread and beans, with the fire crackling in the stove. The rancher found himself watching the children more than eating. The boy, though young, carried himself like someone older, shoulders stiff, always glancing toward his mother as if ready to step in between her and the world. The girl, quieter, studied everything with wide eyes, her hands never straying far from that small bundle. When she finally loosened the cloth, he caught a glimpse of what she carried, a worn rag doll, patched and frayed, but held with reverence as though it were made of gold. Later, after the meal, the woman spoke for the first time since her warning. At the door, "They'll need a place to sleep," she said simply. He nodded, feeling a rush of shame that he had not thought of it sooner. He had only the one bed, his own. He offered it without question, saying he would sleep by the fire. She didn't argue. She laid out the children's blankets carefully, tucking them in as if each fold mattered. He watched her, struck by how her hands, though rough from work, moved with a gentleness he had never known. When the children were settled, she came to sit by the fire. Her eyes, shadowed in the lamplight, carried a weariness deeper than any miles she had traveled. "They've lost much," she said, her voice low. "I've lost much. I won't let them lose again." She looked at him, steady. "Do you understand?" He met her gaze. "I understand." But whether he understood enough, he could not. Saydat, in the days that followed, the ranch shifted in ways he had not expected. The boy followed him at dawn, watching as he saddled the horses, as he chopped wood, as he repaired the fences stretched across the open fields. At first, he said little, answering questions with short nods. But soon he began to ask about the land, about the tools, about the cattle that grazed far beyond the creek. His questions carried a hunger, not for food, but for knowledge, for place. The rancher answered as best he could, showing him how to tie knots, how to check the water troughs, how to hold an axe without splitting his own foot. He was surprised at how quickly the boy learned, how steady his hands were for someone so young. The girl spent her time closer to the cabin, often at her mother's side. She helped with the washing, with the bread, with the small tasks of keeping the home alive. Yet even she found her way into the rancher's day. Sometimes she would follow him to the barn, her rag doll tucked beneath her arm, standing quiet while he worked. When he asked her once if she wanted to ride a horse, her eyes lit up, though she said nothing. He lifted her carefully onto the phasma to the fastlon, Mari's back, steadying her small hands on the reins. Her laughter, sudden and light, startled him. It was the first sound in years that seemed to loosen the tightness in his chest. The woman, for her part, kept to her duties with quiet determination. She did not speak of the past unless asked, and even then her words were brief, as if each memory cost her something to give. But she watched her children closely, every look, every breath, as if guarding them from an unseen shadow. Sometimes, When she thought no one was near, her eyes would cloud, her hands trembling slightly before she steadied herself again. The rancher wondered often what weight she carried beyond what she had told him. He sensed that there were stories she had not shared, fears she had not spoken. There was a strength in her silence, but also a mystery that left him restless at night. Who had she trusted before him, and how had that trust been broken? What dangers had driven her to make such a promise that her children must be his or nothing? One evening, after a long day repairing the corral, he found her standing by the well, her shawl drawn tight against the wind. The children were inside, already drifting to sleep. He joined her, the lantern light spilling across the yard. For a time, they said nothing, only listened to the creak of the well rope and the distant cry of an owl. Then she spoke, almost to herself. Men make promises easy. Keeping them is harder. He did not answer right away. Instead, he looked out across the dark fields where the moon cast silver on the grass. "I've made few promises in my life," he said finally, "but I don't break the ones I do." She turned toward him then, studying his face as though weighing his words against her own measure of truth. The silence that followed was heavier than any words. It was not mistrust, but not yet faith. Something between, balanced on a thin line. The days grew shorter, the nights colder. Winter was on its way, and the rancher felt the season pressing down on them all. There was wood to cut, food to store, cattle to shelter. He threw himself into the work, but even as he did, he could not shake the tension that lingered. The boy still tested him, stepping in close to every task, as though measuring whether this man could truly be the father his mother had promised. The girl still clutched her doll as though it were the only thing she owned in the world. And the woman still carried her silence like armor, offering pieces of herself only in moments, never all at once. One night, when the wind rattled the cabin windows and the fire burned low, he awoke to a sound he had not heard before. It was the boy, whispering in his sleep, words broken and trembling. He sat up, listening, and heard the boy cry out softly for his father, the one who was gone, the one he could never be. The rancher lay back down, staring at the dark rafters above him. The boy's voice still echoed in his ears, and with it came a question that gave him no rest. Could a stranger's promise ever fill the hollow left by blood? Or was he only fooling himself to think that he could build a family from the ashes of another man's life? He did not know the answer, but he knew the question would not let him go. And as the storm winds howled outside, he wondered if the greatest trial ahead was not the winter nor the work, but the hearts of those who now shared his roof. The storm that rolled over the plains in late November seemed to carry with it a warning. Wind clawed at the shutters, snow piled against the door, and the rancher felt the old cabin strain under the weight of winter. Inside, the fire glowed bright, but no warmth could ease the silence that had settled heavy between him and the woman, who now shared his roof. They spoke little except when necessity demanded. The children clung close to her, as if the storm outside had reminded them that they still belonged to a world that could take everything away in an instant. The boy, restless as ever, grew sharper in his watchfulness. He had begun shadowing the rancher more openly, following him to the barn, to the feed shed, even to the frozen creek where the horses drank. At times his questions seemed genuine, curious about the work and the land. But other times his words carried an edge, as though he were testing, waiting for proof that the man beside him was unworthy. When the rancher showed him how to mend a broken fence post, the boy asked, "Would my father have done it this way?" When he taught him how to split logs without wasting wood, the boy muttered, "He already taught me." Each remark was like a splinter beneath the skin, small but unshakable. The girl, meanwhile, grew more attached to the rancher in her quiet way. She began leaving her rag doll on the windowsill while she sat near him as he worked on small repairs inside. Sometimes she hummed under her breath, a tune without words, as if the rhythm of his hammering had given her courage to sing. When he once asked her what the song was, she looked startled, then whispered, "Mama used to sing it." Her mother glanced up sharply at that, and for a moment the air between them felt charged. As though even a child's tune could stir something unspoken. It was the woman who remained the greatest mystery. She kept the household steady, baking bread, tending the fire, mending clothes. But she avoided long conversations, her answers clipped and practical. When he tried once to speak of the future, of planting more crops come spring, of building another room onto the cabin, her gaze turned distant. "One season at a time," she said, as though binding her thoughts to the present only, refusing to imagine more. The rancher could not help but wonder what fear kept her from looking ahead. Some nights he thought he heard her rise after the children slept, pacing by the window, staring into the darkness as if expecting someone or something to come. Other nights he woke to the sound of muffled sobs, quickly silenced when she realized he was awake. She carried her burdens deep, and though he longed to ask, he sensed she would not answer. It was in this fragile quiet that the first cracks began to show. Supplies in town were running low, and he knew he would have to make the journey soon. But leaving the cabin unsettled him. He had no doubts about her strength, but there was a watchfulness in her eyes, a guarded way she checked the locks, that made him uneasy. When he told her he planned to ride to town for flour and salt, she stiffened. "Go in daylight," she said quickly. "Don't linger," he frowned. "I always ride by day, then return the same day," she pressed. "Don't stay at the inn," he studied her. "You expect trouble?" Her lips tightened, and she turned away. "Just do as I ask?" That was all she said, but it left him wondering what danger she believed might follow them here. He had lived on this land for years, and aside from the usual rustlers and drifters, no threat had lingered. Yet the fear in her tone was real, sharper than simple caution. He carried that unease with him as he rode to town, watching the tree line for shadows that never came. In town, whispers always followed him now. Not unkind, but curious. Folks knew he had brought a woman and her children to the ranch. Some called it bravery, others folly. "A man alone can weather a storm," one old neighbor said. "But with a family, you've got something to lose." Those words gnawed at him as he loaded supplies onto the wagon. Something to lose. He had thought loneliness the hardest burden, but perhaps love or the chance of it was heavier still. When he returned, the boy met him at the yard, face flushed with excitement. "A rider came by," he said. "Asked questions." The rancher's stomach tightened. "What kind of questions?" "About us," the boy replied. "About Mama." The woman stepped quickly from the cabin, her voice sharp. "That's enough." She pulled the boy close, silencing him with a look. The rancher asked her what it meant, but she only shook her head. "It was no one," she said. "Don't press it." But he did press it, again and again, until finally one night, when the children were asleep, she spoke in fragments. A man she once knew, someone who had made promises he never kept, had been circling her life long before she answered the rancher's letters. "He doesn't want the children," she said, her voice bitter. "He only wants control. If he finds us, he'll try to claim what isn't his." The rancher felt anger rise in him, hot and steady. "If he comes here, he'll find no welcome," but she only shook her head. "You don't know him. He doesn't quit." The words hung heavy. For the first time, the rancher saw her not only as a widow, but as a woman hunted by a past she could not escape. The promise she had made, the demand that her children be his, suddenly took on sharper meaning. She had not been bargaining for comfort. She had been bargaining for protection, for a shield against the man who might yet come knocking. Days turned into weeks, and the unease grew. The boy grew more restless, asking again and again about the stranger who had come by. Will he return? He asked, eyes narrowed. The girl clung closer to her mother, her doll held tight. And the woman, though she said little, began checking the door twice each night, her hand never far from the old rifle that leaned by the wall. The rancher took to keeping watch outside after dark, pacing the yard, scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. Sometimes he thought he saw shadows shifting at the edge of the pasture, though they vanished when he drew near. Other times, the night was so still he wondered if fear itself had sharpened his senses too much. But the tension grew, pulling at him like a rope drawn tight, ready to snap. One bitter night, with snow falling thick, he heard hoofbeats far off. Slow, steady, not the rush of cattle, but the deliberate tread of a single horse. He stood at the fence, rifle in hand, heart pounding. But when the sound came close, it stopped. He waited, breath clouding in the cold air, until the silence swallowed all. No rider appeared. No horse came into view. Yet in the morning, near the edge of the property, he found tracks pressed deep into the snow. One set only, leading in but not out. He said nothing to the children, but when the woman saw the prints, her face went pale. He's found us, she whispered. From that day on, life at the ranch shifted. The boy begged to learn the rifle, demanding he be allowed to defend his mother and sister. The girl cried at night, fearing the shadow of a man she had never seen but somehow seemed to know. And the woman moved through the cabin with a fierceness that was almost brittle, as if holding the pieces of her world together by sheer force of will. The rancher tried to stay steady, to keep the work going, to show no fear, but inside he felt the weight of a conflict he could not avoid. He had promised to take her and the children as his own, but what if doing so brought danger to them all? What if this man from her past was not a shadow, but a storm waiting to break? One evening, as he sat sharpening his knife by the fire, the boy asked bluntly, "Will you fight him when he comes?" The rancher looked up, meeting the boy's unflinching gaze. "If he means harm," he said. "That's not an answer," the boy pressed. "I need to know." And in that moment, the rancher realized the boy was not only testing him, he was demanding proof. Proof that this man, this stranger, could be more than just his mother's choice. Proof that he could be the father the boy both doubted and longed for. The knife slipped slightly in his grip, sparks flashing as metal scraped stone. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and in that narrow cabin the question hung heavier than the storm. Not if the man from her past would come, but when, and when he did, whose strength would be enough to protect what little they had begun to build. The rancher had no answer yet, but he knew the night would come soon when words would no longer be enough. The winter deepened, each day colder than the one before, and the ranch seemed to huddle against the storms like a ship braced against the sea. Snow pressed against the cabin walls, drifts high as the windows, and the wind never ceased its moaning. Yet even with the cold tightening its grip, it was not the weather that weighed heaviest on the rancher's mind. It was the tracks he had found in the snow weeks before, and the certainty, unspoken yet shared by them all, that a shadow was moving closer with every passing night. The boy grew sharper, quicker, restless with a need to prove himself. He begged again and again to learn the rifle, and though the rancher hesitated, at last he showed him the basics, how to hold it steady, how to check the barrel, how to aim without jerking the trigger. The boy's hands trembled at first, but soon steadied, his eyes narrowing with focus. The rancher watched him closely, torn between pride and worry. A boy so young should not have to learn such lessons, not in a world that ought to give him time to grow. Yet this was no ordinary winter. The girl clung tighter to her mother, her rag doll always near, as if that bit of cloth and stuffing was the only shield she trusted. At night she sometimes slipped from her blankets and crept into her mother's bed, whispering fears she could not quiet. The woman soothed her gently, humming the tune the girl so often carried, though her own eyes stayed open long after the child had drifted off. The woman herself seemed to grow leaner with each passing week, though she never complained. She worked tirelessly, baking, mending, watching over her children with a fierceness that left no doubt she was ready to fight the world if it came to her door. Yet there were moments when her guard faltered. The rancher caught her once at the window, clutching the shawl tight around her shoulders, staring into the storm as though she could see beyond it to some figure approaching. He asked her what haunted her so, but she only shook her head. "He's out there," she said. "I can feel it." It was during one of those long nights when the tension came to a breaking point. The rancher had risen to throw another log on the fire when he heard the girl cry out in her sleep. The boy was already awake, sitting upright on his blankets, eyes blazing. "You'll fight him, won't you?" he demanded again, the same question that had haunted their evenings. The rancher set the log carefully, sparks rising. "If he comes with harm, yes," he said. "That's not enough." The boy's voice cracked, but he pushed on. "You have to promise. Mama needs someone who'll stand, not someone who just says, 'if.'" The woman stirred then, laying a calming hand on her son's shoulder. "Enough now," she whispered. But her own eyes sought the rancher's, wide and questioning, as if she, too, waited for words stronger than what he had given. He said nothing. The silence stretched until only the fire spoke, and in it lay every doubt he had tried to bury. The next morning, before dawn, he saddled his horse. He had no plan, only a need to see the land, to check the ridges and the creek bed for signs of trespass. The air bit like knives against his face, but he pushed on. At the far end of the pasture, near the tree line, he found what he feared. Fresh hoof prints, circling, cutting back toward the hills. Whoever rode there had not come by chance. He returned to the cabin, jaw set, and told her what he had seen. Her face went pale, but she did not act surprised. Instead, she gathered the children close and began packing small bundles as if ready to flee. "We can't run," he told her firmly. "Snow's too deep. They'd catch us faster." Her eyes flickered with fear and defiance. "Then what do you plan?" "To hold the ground," he said simply. "It's the only way." From that day on, the ranch became a fortress. He reinforced the doors, checked the locks, sharpened tools that could serve as weapons. He kept the rifle close at all times, even when chopping wood or tending the livestock. The boy followed him, eagerly, asking to help, while the girl hovered near her mother, watching with wide eyes. The woman worked alongside him, her silence now edged with grim resolve, but with every preparation, the weight grew heavier. The rancher could feel it pressing on his chest at night in the stillness before dawn. He had fought storms, wolves, and wild cattle, but this was different. This was no beast or weather. This was a man, unknown but dangerous, driven by something stronger than chance. And it was not only his life at stake now, but the lives of those who had placed their trust in him. Tension broke again. One evening when a rider's shadow appeared on the ridge. He stood at the cabin door, rifle ready, the woman clutching her. Children behind him. The figure lingered only a moment, then turned and disappeared into the falling snow. But that glimpse was enough to confirm their fear. He was near, watching, waiting. That night, the boy refused to sleep, pacing like a caged wolf. "We can't just wait," he argued. "We should go after him." The rancher shook his head. "That's what he wants. To draw us out, leave the cabin unguarded." But the boy would not be quieted. His voice rose, sharp with anger and fear. "Then when? When he breaks the door? When he takes Mama again? The words cut deep. The woman hushed him quickly, but her own eyes burned with the truth of it. The rancher felt the weight of their stares, demanding answers he did not yet have. The days crawled forward, each one filled with the same waiting. Sometimes they saw no sign at all, and hope flickered weakly that perhaps the stranger had gone. Other times, tracks in the snow or a figure on the ridge reminded them he lingered, patient as the frost. The suspense gnawed at them all, wearing their nerves thin. One afternoon, when the rancher returned from checking the pasture, he found the boy standing at the cabin door with a rifle in his hands. The barrel wavered, his finger too close to the trigger. "Put it down," the rancher said sharply. "I'm ready," the boy insisted, jaw set. "You're not," the rancher replied, taking the weapon from him. "Not yet." The boy's face flushed with fury. "Then you'll fail us all." The words stung, but beneath them was fear, a fear the boy could not hide, the same fear that haunted them all. The rancher placed the rifle back on its rack, then laid a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Courage isn't just holding a gun," he said quietly. "It's waiting when waiting's the hardest thing." The boy turned away, eyes wet, unwilling to let him see. That night, the woman spoke again in the firelight. "He won't stop, you must understand that. He won't stop until he's broken us." Her words trembled, not with weakness but with the weight of certainty. The rancher met her gaze, steady. "Then we won't break." But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. How long could they hold out, trapped in a cabin while the storm raged and a predator circled? How long before fear itself tore them apart? The answer came sooner than he wished. On a moonless night, with snow falling thick and the fire burning low, the dogs outside began to bark. Their voices rose, sharp and frantic, then cut off suddenly, leaving only silence. The rancher grabbed his rifle, heart pounding, and moved to the door. The boy was already awake, clutching his blanket, eyes wide. The girl whimpered, pressing into her mother's side. The woman stood rigid, her hand tight on the old shotgun by the wall. Outside, the snow muffled every sound, but in the stillness, footsteps crunched slow, deliberate, drawing closer to the cabin. The rancher raised the rifle, breath held, every nerve alive with the tension of the moment. Whoever had haunted their nights was no longer a shadow. He was here, at their door, ready to test every promise, every fragile bond, every ounce of courage they had left. The latch rattled once, twice. Then the door shuddered under a heavy blow. The children cried out, the woman pulled them back, and the rancher braced himself, finger steady on the trigger. The storm outside howled like a living thing. The fire inside flickered low, and the cabin walls seemed to close in around them. Everything they had feared, everything they had prepared for, had come at last. The next moment would decide whether this family, fragile and untested, could stand or fall apart beneath the weight of the past that had come to claim them. The door shook again, harder this time, the wood groaning under the weight of the blow. The rancher's grip on the rifle tightened. His breath caught somewhere between fear and determination. Behind him, the children huddled against their mother, her arm wrapped firmly around them, her other hand clutching the old shotgun. The boy's eyes blazed, the girl's face buried in her mother's shawl. The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, the silence between each strike was louder still, filled with everything unspoken, their fear, their trust, and the promise that had brought them together. When the door shuttered once more, the rancher raised his voice, steady though his heart raced. "Whoever you are, turn back now. This place won't fall to you." The blows stopped. For a moment, only the wind answered. Then a voice came through the crack in the wood, low and bitter. "You think you can keep what's mine? You think you can play husband to her, father to them? You're nothing but a thief of what doesn't belong to you." The woman's hand tightened on the children. Her voice cut sharp through the stillness. "You lost your claim the day you left us to starve." The rancher felt the words hit like sparks on dry grass. He understood then. This was no stranger. This was the man she had fled, the one whose shadow had followed her across states and miles, the one she had sworn her children would never belong to again. The voice outside spat curses. Then came another heavy crash against the door. The hinges strained, the latch rattled, but still the door held. The rancher set his stance, the barrel of the rifle aimed steady. "You'll not touch them," he said, his voice firm. "They're mine now." A silence followed, broken only by the whine of the wind. Then footsteps crunched backward through the snow. For a heartbeat, hope stirred that the man had given up. But soon the sound of hooves tore through the night, circling, circling, as though he tested every side of the cabin for weakness. Hours passed like that, the rider never far, the family never resting. The boy clung to wakefulness, demanding to help, though his small hands shook. The rancher forced him to lie down, whispering, "Your time will come, but not tonight." At last, near dawn, the hoofbeats faded, swallowed by the storm god. When morning came, they found the tracks circling the ranch in a wide ring, pressed deep into the snow. No body lay in the yard, no blood stained the ground. The enemy had not been vanquished, but driven back for now. The woman's face was pale as she studied the marks. "He'll return," she whispered. "He always does." The rancher laid a hand on her shoulder, firm but gentle. "Then we'll be ready." The days that followed carried a new weight. They no longer lived waiting for shadows. They lived facing the certainty of an enemy who would not stop. The boy grew quieter, his questions sharper, his trust still testing but no longer doubtful. He no longer asked if the rancher would fight. He had seen the answer in the way the man stood at the door, unflinching. The girl, though still timid, began to cling less to her doll and more to the warmth of the family gathered by the fire each night. And the woman, though still wary, began to move with a steadier calm, as though she knew the man beside her would not falter when the storm returned. It was near the end of winter when the rider came again. This time, the sound of hooves did not circle. It came straight across the pasture, bold and steady, until the figure of a man on horseback loomed out of the snow. He dismounted near the yard, stomping through the drifts, his voice carrying loud. "I'll take them now," he called. "You've had your play at family. Hand them over and I'll let you live." The rancher stepped forward, rifle in hand, his breath steady despite the hammering in his chest. The woman stood at the doorway, children behind her, her own shotgun raised. "You left us once," she called back, her voice like steel. "We owe you nothing." The man's face twisted with rage. "They're mine by blood," he shouted. The rancher raised the rifle, his voice even. "Blood don't make a father. Love does, and you've shown them none." The standoff stretched, every breath drawn tight. Snow swirled around them, the wind carrying the weight of the prairie itself. For a long moment, it seemed violence would break open and shatter everything. But at last, the rider spat into the snow, fury flashing in his eyes. "This isn't over," he growled. Then he mounted his horse and rode hard into the storm, vanishing once more. When the sound faded, silence fell heavy. The woman trembled, lowering her gun. The children clung to her, faces pressed tight against her dress. The rancher lowered his rifle slowly, his chest heaving with the weight of what might have been. Days turned to weeks, and no rider returned. The tracks melted when the thaw came, and the land softened under the first touch of spring. Though they never forgot the fear, life slowly returned to rhythm. The cattle grazed once more in green fields. The creek ran fast with melted snow. And the air grew warmer. The boy began to work beside the rancher daily, his questions now tempered by trust. He no longer spoke of his father, no longer tested the man's worth. Instead, he listened, learned, and even laughed on rare occasions, his guard lowering like ice breaking under spring sun. The girl bloomed quietly, her laughter returning with the flowers, her rag doll still cherished but no longer clutched so tightly. And the woman, though the weight in her eyes never vanished completely, began to look beyond the present. She spoke of planting a garden come summer, of sewing curtains for the windows, of making the cabin a home rather than just a shelter. Sometimes, when the evening light glowed across the land, she stood beside the rancher without speaking, their silence no longer heavy but shared, like a bond deeper than words. One night, when the stars burned clear and the children slept soundly, she spoke softly by the fire. When I first came here, I was ready only to survive. I thought love was gone forever, that all I could ask was safety. But you've given them more. You've given me more. Her eyes shone in the firelight, steady and unguarded at last. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. The rancher felt the truth of it settle deep in him. He had once thought loneliness his only companion, the land his only inheritance. But now, as he looked at the woman before him and thought of the children sleeping under his roof, he knew he had been given something greater. Not just a family by blood, but a family by choice, bound by promises kept when it mattered most. The seasons turned, and though the shadow of the man from her past lingered always at the edges of memory, he never returned. Perhaps the sight of a home defended, of love made stronger than fear, had driven him off. Or perhaps he had vanished into the endless miles of prairie, lost to time. It did not matter. What mattered was that the ranch stood, the family within it stronger than before. The boy grew taller, steadier, his hands skilled in work once too heavy for him. The girl learned to ride, her laughter ringing clear across the pasture. The woman's eyes softened, her smile returning like spring after long winter. And the rancher, once known only as the lonely man on the hill, was lonely no more. The prairie still howled with storms. The winters still came hard. The land still demanded every ounce of sweat and strength. But within the cabin walls, warmth burned steady, not just from the fire, but from the voices and footsteps that filled it. He had found not just a wife, not just children, but a reason greater than himself to face each day. And though the world beyond remained harsh and uncertain, he knew one truth as sure as the rising sun: love chosen, love fought for, love defended. That was the kind of bond that no shadow could break, no storm could steal. The lonely rancher who had once lived in silence now lived in the noise of family, in the laughter of children, in the steady heartbeat of a woman who had trusted him with everything she held dear. And in that noise he found peace. The prairie stretched wide around them, endless and untamed, but within their small cabin they had carved out something lasting. Not just survival, not just shelter, but a home built on promises kept in hearts. Made whole again, and that was enough for him. Enough for them all. Top of form, bottom of form,